strengthening our collective understanding of this issue. I would also like to extend our gratitude to the governments of Italy and the United States for their continued financial and technical support. Their commitment has been instrumental not only in making this event possible, but also in advancing the development and strengthening of national early warning systems across our member states. As we all know, the drug landscape is constantly evolving. Over the past decade, the emergence of synthetic drugs, particularly opioids in North America, has transformed the nature of the drug problem in our region. The opioid crisis in the United States, and to a lesser extent in Canada, has demonstrated the devastating consequences of these substances, particularly in terms of overdose incidents and loss of life. While the impact in Latin America and the Caribbean has not reached the same scale, this should not lead to complacency. On the contrary, it underscores the importance of vigilance. Synthetic opioids, including fentanyl, pose a serious and growing threat, especially as they are increasingly found mixed with other substances such as cocaine and cannabis, often without the knowledge of the user. This significantly increases the risk of toxic events, overdoses, and deaths. This is precisely why detection and rapid response are so critical. Over the past several years, the OID, with the support of our partners, has worked to strengthen national early warning systems, mechanisms designed to detect, assess, and respond to emerging drug threats in a timely manner. At the regional level, the Early Warning System of the Americas, known by its Spanish acronym SATA, has become a key platform for sharing alerts and information across countries. I encourage all member states to continue contributing to the system so that we can collectively respond more effectively to emerging risks. Today's webinar is an important opportunity to deepen our understanding of illicit opioids, their pharmacology, their risks, and their real-world impacts. Through technical presentations and case studies, we aim to strengthen your capacity and that of your national systems to respond proactively and effectively. Let me close once again by thanking our donors, USINL and Italy, our distinguished speakers, and all of you for your participation and commitment. I hope you find today's discussion both informative and useful as we continue working together to address the challenges posed by synthetic drugs in our region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Please welcome Pernell Clark, specialist of the OID CCAT.
Good morning. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Paula, for guiding us through this morning's opening and taking up the MC duties. Thank you, Maria, for your welcome remarks. Good morning to everyone. My name is Pernell Clark. I'm a specialist here with the OID, the Inter-American Observatory on Drugs with CCAD. And I'd like to welcome all of you to today's very important webinar. This is one we wanted to do a little earlier, but we were finally able to get it done today. And I would like to join Maria by first welcoming our esteemed panelists for agreeing to participate in this event, as well as to welcoming those participants who've joined us this morning. You should all have a copy of the agenda, and the format that we will use this morning is that we will first have two presentations, first by Ms. Cheryl Corbin, who is the Director of the Forensic Sciences Center in Barbados, and Sergeant Malachi Reckley, who works with the Scientific Support Services Unit in the Royal Bahamas Police Force in the Bahamas, after which we will open the floor to questions and comments from participants. One of the things that I would like to encourage participants to do is to use the chat to pose any questions that you have for our panelists. And if you want to take the floor and make your comments live and in person, Mr. Massey will be able to get you onto the platform so you can ask your questions directly and interact with the panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to briefly introduce our two panelists, and then we'll go straight into the presentations. I'm going to start first with Ms. Cheryl Corbin. Ms. Corbin is as I mentioned before, the director of the Forensic Sciences Center in the newly renamed Ministry of Legal Affairs and Criminal Justice in Barbados. She has served the public sector, public service in Barbados for over 40 years. 25 of those years were with the Forensic Sciences Center as its director. Ms. Corbin is a graduate of the University of the West Indies, Clearfield campus. She has a Bachelor of Science with honors degree in chemistry, and she has a Master of Science degree in forensic science from King's College in London. And she actually, and I didn't know this until yesterday, she actually became Barbados's first forensic scientist, which is quite an achievement. During her tenure, Cheryl has been recognized for her support in 8 Caribbean member states, 8 Caribbean territories. She's coordinated major regional forensic initiatives, including projects under the umbrella of the United Nations Drug Control Program, as it was then known, and the European Union Development Program. She's also provided technical assistance directly to St. Lucia and Guyana with the support of the IADB, the Inter-American Development Bank. In addition to her scientific leadership, Cher Antoinette is also an accomplished creative, a national award-winning writer, visual artist, and photographer whose work has been featured in regional and international exhibitions and publications. And Cheryl, I still remember, I think it was pre-pandemic when you were actually here in DC to coordinate an exhibition of some of your art, and I attended that. So to make her presentation.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our information here with everyone. What I would like to do, I am going to share my screen and go ahead with the presentation as we are going to be speaking of this morning. Okay, do that, and I'll do that. Right. Okay. Hold on a second, please. Let me just hold on a sec. Let me go back. Okay, got it. All right. Okay, so it's this one here. Okay, let me just go into presentation mode, and what I'm going to do, which will make it a little easier for myself, I'm going to come off a camera, and so you'll just hear me if you don't mind, because
That's perfectly fine.
otherwise it
perfectly fine.
becomes too distracting for me.
No problem. We can see your screen and we can hear you clearly.
Okay, all right, let me get back to my screen so that I can see my screen myself. All right, hold on one sec. Okay. Right. All right. Okay, so today we're going to take a look and we're going to explore a little bit about opioids. But what I want to make very clear is that Barbados itself is not experiencing an opioid crisis. Even though we know that fentanyl is a major global concern and we need to identify what it means for us in the Caribbean. But even though we are not experiencing that crisis right now, we know that preparedness is essential. So our goal today is to get you to understand a little bit about fentanyl and how it works, and and hopefully this understanding is, but for this particular exercise, it would more be chemistry and toxicology that would be relevant to today's topic. We also play a key role in our national early warning system, which helps us detect emerging drug trends. And within that system, it says itself, we are the agency that's responsible for doing the testing and verification of these substances under query and the investigations that would go on after that. And for the authorizing entities to determine whether they need to create an alert for the rest of the country. Now, what is important here as well is that in the detection of dealing with substances that are not common and that you don't have a lot of reference data and libraries and so on, is to be able to have available the most appropriate scientific equipment with the most updated technologies, and also to be able to have personnel who know how to deal with the interpretations and so on. And, I may sound like a proud mother, don't care, but I'm very proud of my officers because they do have that capacity, especially our chemistry officers, our chemistry section. So let me just continue here now. As I'd said previously, let me just make it very clear, we do not currently have a widespread opioid problem. But however, because we are all part of the global ecosystem, synthetic opioids, especially fentanyl, are moving rapidly across borders and often through online markets, shipping routes, tourism, and things like that. Because of the access that everyone now has, it's not a situation anymore where you have to you be in this particular class or strata or whatever. Everyone has access to the internet. Everyone has access to bringing in things through couriers and so on. The post offices are still there. They're still functioning. So what it requires is a lot of preparedness and vigilance at these ports of entry. It also requires, as I said, vigilance would be any form of surveillance, and it also, even more importantly, to the necessity for the laboratory capacity, which is what I alluded to earlier. And even if we do not have a crisis, even if we have isolated cases, one small amount of fentanyl or whichever opioid you're looking at or whichever designer drug, this could lead to very severe consequences and snowballing effects. Yeah. So this is why our preparedness really lends towards the protection. Okay. So let's just I am not doing this as if it's a chemistry or toxicology class. Okay, I'm just speaking here in very, if you want to say layman type general terms. And I guess if you do want further information, you can lend the questions to our specialists and so on, and also our colleague from Bahamas. So let me just give you the general playing field as to what we're dealing with as it relates to opioids and to get some understanding of them. Now, opioids fall into three main categories. Those are natural opioids, semi-synthetic, and fully synthetic opioids. Now, let me break down the natural ones because this obviously is where the story begins. The natural opioids come from the opium poppy, which is Papaver somniferum. People will have different pronunciations, but the spelling is always still the same. And inside the poppy's latex sap, there are several alkaloids. Now, morphine is the most abundant, and it is extracted directly from the plant. Codeine occurs naturally in smaller amounts, but okay. Now, for the semi-synthetic opioids that we know of today, or we're working with, the most common are oxycodone, hydrocodone, and heroin. And the reason those will be considered semi-synthetic is because they are derivatives of the natural opioids. Okay, this is where they're chemically modified versions of the plant's original alkaloids. Now, the fully synthetic opioids are like fentanyl and methadone, where these are created entirely in laboratories with no plant origins, and chemists with really smart chemists and resources, they would be creating all of these different types of synthetic drugs. And this is where a lot of the danger lies, because some of these derivatives may have come about intentionally, because some of these synthetic drugs, even the fentanyl itself and methadone, have medical uses in particularly prescribed amounts. It is when you go outside of that, that is where a lot of the danger lies. Okay. Now, all opioids work by binding to opioid receptors in the brain and in your nervous system, and they primarily reduce pain. But in reducing pain, they can also slow breathing, and they create a fairly high level of dependence if continued use is what is happening. So a lot of the conversation around opioids is the balance between the pain relief and the risk of the addiction. And that really is a lot of the heart of the conversation around the use of opioids. Okay. Next slide. Now, what is fentanyl? Now, fentanyl is a fully synthetic opioid, as I had mentioned in the previous slide, and is extremely potent. It is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. Medically, it has legitimate uses, as I said, for severe pain and also in anesthesia. But the problem arises with illicit fentanyl is it is produced primarily without regulation. Okay, the small amounts that are used for pharmaceutical purposes, those are regulated. But the bulk of fentanyl that's in distribution right now is not, excuse me, and is not produced under regulation. They're produced within clandestine laboratories and so on. The other danger is that it's often mixed into heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. It's mixed in counterfeit pills. So many times the users may have no idea that they are consuming fentanyl. And again, because it is so addictive, in the very small quantities. But the flip side of fentanyl is that it is extremely dangerous. The window between beneficial use and overdosing, that line, that small window, that window is very, very small as compared to other drugs that are in use. Now, because fentanyl is so potent, the difference between a dose and a fatal dose, as I indicated earlier, is extremely small and is measured more in micrograms than in grams or in milligrams. And because that amount is so small, the illicit producers cannot really measure these things accurately. So the risk of accidental overdosing in their formulations is very, very high. And as I said, fentanyl is also frequently hidden in other drugs, meaning people may overdose without ever knowing what it is they were exposed to. Its effects come on extremely quickly, and this in itself also overwhelms the emergency responders. And this is possibly one of the reasons why fentanyl has become such a major driver of overdose deaths globally. Okay. Now, just a little bit on the pharmacological effects and the overdose indicators of fentanyl. Opioids in general produce euphoria, drowsiness, slowed breathing, and constricted pupils. But these effects are why sometimes they are misused, but they're also what makes them very, very dangerous, especially the slow breathing. Because the overdose signs, which would include, as I have here, unresponsiveness, very slow or suspended breathing, blue lips or fingertips, because your breathing is slow, your respiratory processes are slow, you're not oxygenating. So you would end up with blue lips or fingertips and pinpoint pupils. And recognizing these signs early can save a person's life. But the problem is that the majority of the time, it is never soon enough. And this is why awareness is so important. Okay, now, one of the things that we recognize with opioids is that there is a mechanism via which we can, as much as we can, reverse the effects so that at least we can try to do what can be done to save that person's life. And because fentanyl is so dangerous, we at the Forensic Sciences Center, where our chemistry officers are concerned, and all of the white powders and tablets and everything that comes in, technically, we always have, not technically, all the time, we have Narcan available if we recognize that one of our officers has been exposed. We always have Narcan available. And even like my senior officer who goes out to assist the law enforcement, whether it be at various scenes or at various drug seizures and so on, she walks with the Narcan because we cannot take any chances, because by the time you find out it is fentanyl, it may be too late. This is not being said to scare persons, but this just is being said because that's the gravity of the situation. Okay, so I just wanted to put a little bit in there to explain what Narcan is. Narcan is the brand name for naloxone, which is a medication that is used to rapidly reverse the opioid overdose. It is considered the gold standard emergency antidote for opioid toxicity. A simple explanation as to how Narcan actually works. Opioids like morphine, heroin, oxycodone, and fentanyl work by binding to the opioid receptors in the brain. And when too much opioid is present, it slows or stops breathing, which is what causes the overdose deaths. Now, the way how the naloxone works, it competes with the opioid for the same receptors, okay? And in doing that, it pushes the opioid off the receptor, blocking the receptor temporarily. And this can immediately restore breathing and reverse the life-threatening effects. However, this is not a permanent situation, because if other measures are not put in place to life-saving measures for the person, there can be a relapse. Okay? So you can think of it as saying that the opioid is sitting in the seat on the receptor, and the naloxone comes in, pushes it out of the way, sits in the seat itself, and stops the overdosing. But after a while, which could be as little as 15 minutes, it gets tired sitting down in one place and it gets up and moves. And then the opioid comes back and takes up its former place. Okay? But why the naloxone or Narcan works so quickly is because, as I said, it has a strong attraction to the receptors. It acts within 2 to 3 minutes, and it can reverse the symptoms when a person is unresponsive. And this is why most first responders worldwide carry it in their kits. But it's important for you to know that naloxone usually lasts anywhere between 30 to 90 minutes. And the effects of a lot of the opioids, especially fentanyl, last much longer than that. So what will happen then is that even though you try to reverse the overdose, reverse the effects of the overdose, those symptoms can come back. So medical attention is required even if the person was given the Narcan medication, which comes in the form of either a nasal spray, which is the most common used, or it is also in the form of an injection. But again, that would only be used by the medical professionals. Okay. The good thing is it is relatively safe and it has no effect, even if the opioids are not present, because this is the other thing. If you are, there's some medication, some, if you want to say, supposed antidotes or reverse mechanisms, that if you apply them and the target drug that you're trying to reverse is not present, you can still do harm to the person. Okay. Fortunately, naloxone is not one of those compounds. So this is why it is, as I said, the gold standard for first responders. Okay, now let's take a little look at what we have actually seen in Barbados. Now, here in Barbados, we have seen limited opioid submissions over the years. I'm really talking about a long period of time. We have had suspected cases of fentanyl, but those were not confirmed to be fentanyl. And we have had our limited submissions included tramadol and codeine, some morphine. But those are substances that had legitimate medical use, but they were in the wrong hands and being used for the wrong purposes, but they were legitimately brought into the country. But to date, we have not confirmed any fentanyl cases. But again, our role in the early warning system ensures that any unusual findings that they're reported quickly, because we have the different agencies that would give us the alerts, and we would have our systems even more so when we go back into the center in May, between May and June, July. We are getting new equipment as it relates to LCMS and so on and GCs, and we would be setting up our screens and our confirmation methodologies specifically with these types of drugs in mind. Okay. That being said, that moves in easily to slide 11, where I just want to tell you what our capacity and that we want to reassure everyone that we do have the capacity to detect opioids, including fentanyl and its analogs, Again, that's where I was speaking about earlier, where I said when you have these drugs that are being made within laboratories, there can be all sorts of different derivatives that would have similar or stronger effects, and there are no boundaries where the testing is concerned for these things. The testing is trial and error, and the trials are done on persons. It's not like how we would have the proper laboratory testings and various pilots and so on. You're not having that. You give it to a set of people and see whether they're either high, whether they die, or whatever, which really is not the humane or morally compassed way of doing anything, at least not within science. And that's our opinion. So we will be using our methodologies include GCMS, LCMS, MS, which, as far as I know right now, is the gold standard for instruments for drug identification. And our methodologies follow UNODC and SWIG drug. We've been using SWIG drug for quite a while, and SWIG drug is working really well for us because one of the things that we recognize is that that particular program that which started quite a few years ago, over 10 years ago, with the Special Working Group on Drugs, which included not only the FBI, but the UN and I think EU may be part of it and other specific laboratories. What it meant was that we are getting real-time information, real-time updates on methodologies, and they send the notifications and the newsletters so that you can have an early opportunity to address and adjust your methodologies without having to wait for the textbooks to come out. That's one of the benefits of having the internet and the various social media platforms and groups that we can be in for these types of investigations. We also participate in proficiency testing to ensure our accuracy and also the continually improving skill set of the officers on the bench. And our toxicology section can also confirm opioids in, excuse me, in biological samples because we are now setting up to be full stream ahead in doing post-mortem toxicology. For a lot of years, that's one of the things that Barbados has been a little deficient in doing post-mortem toxicology because the methodologies for that in blood that is, for want of a word, dead or deceased is totally different to the living material. So we are now getting ourselves on stream for that. So we are fairly certain that if fentanyl ever appears in Barbados and we are told of it and we are given substances that are suspected to be fentanyl, we're fairly certain that we'll be able to detect it and we're ready to do that. Okay. Just quickly now, we want to let you know how we would actually deal with it. Okay. Besides the universal precautions that will be being used in handling any suspected or unknown chemical substance, gloves, double gloves, masks. Sometimes the chemistry officers, based on what they're dealing with or what information law enforcement has given them, a decision is made that you wear full face respirator as opposed to just an N95 mask, or it's just opposed to a dust mask. You will, you'll be gloved up. You will depend on circumstance. We may even go with full PPE. Okay, but again, once a suspected case of fentanyl, it would be full PPE. Okay, and it is also important for those of you who are on here that either work within the law enforcement entity or are part of, well, I would think that my colleague from Bahamas would assist his service in making sure that they're ready. What we also do is to give our law enforcement here, the Barbados Police Service, the requisite training on how to handle the various substances. We try as much as possible to encourage them to have certain things in their kits when they go out. But again, unfortunately, we are not responsible for gearing the police service. And this is something that I will say here. It is important that, yes, we can do as much as we can at the laboratory and get it right, but the first responders, which are inclusive of the police, they're the ones that are there when the warrants are being executed. They need to be protected properly. And we do all we can to ensure that the information is communicated. So what we would tend to do, if we don't deal it with the police directly, I will funnel it up to the ministry. Well, luckily now we are under the same ministry, so I will send it up to the permanent secretary and hope that they would push out some policy that needs to be implemented within the force. So when a suspected case of fentanyl comes in, we follow our strict chain of custody procedures, and we begin with well, we go through the whole process of the submission. We have a laboratory information management system, which is called the BEAST. It's an acronym. It means Barcoded Evidence Analytical Statistical Tracking System. And every case has a unique identifier number and so on. And the disposition and the movement of the case is captured by barcoding and scanning as it moves through the sections within the department. If it is, whether it be that it is from a postmortem case or a known physical substance case, we would begin with screening, whether it be screening by either immunoassay, whether it be immunoassay, whether it be GC, or we actually have a unit that we use. An overseas agency gifted us with this, and it's called TrueNarc. And not only us, but the Barbados Drug Service, the police service, ourselves. I'm not sure if there's another entity, customs maybe. This is a particular unit that you can scan over the top of the unknown substance, and it gives you some indication as to what you are likely to be encountering. Most times it gives confirmation whether it's positive or negative. Sometimes it cannot give you the confirmation, and then we would then take it further from there. But that is just a on-site screening procedure that we have. But there are other screening methods that, like for instance, if we're doing with postmortems, we will use Randox, and that would give us a screen, a qualitative screen, not a quantitative one, and then we would have to confirm whether with GCMS or LCMS-MS. If fentanyl is detected, since that is the topic of conversation for this morning, we would immediately inform NCSA, which is our National Council of Substance Abuse, the police service. We inform the Ministry of Health. And because we are under the Ministry of Justice, I will be obligated to inform our ministry. And what this does is that then that would, depending on the circumstances, it may trigger the early warning system alert. But what is also done is that once we get information, even if it doesn't trigger the EWS, we will also coordinate with some of our regional partners. And the key message here, however, is that you must have a clear and established workflow as to how you're going to deal with these queries when they come in. Okay, almost there. Now, just to say a little bit on the regional and global trends. Now, globally, fentanyl is driving the overdose epidemic in North America. Latin America has reported increasing seizures of the synthetic opioids, but in the Caribbean, our detections have been sporadic, but they're still happening. We've confirmed cases of fentanyl in the Dominican Republic, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, and USVI. And so, yeah, it is in the Caribbean. We can't ignore that anymore. And a lot of the online markets make it easy for substances to enter any territory. And then also which is a problem that you had years ago when a lot of drugs were put in pill form. People have their medications, they have their vitamins, and a lot of these clandestine labs are good enough or smart enough, or I don't even want to use the word diligent, but within their own world, that's what they're being, I suppose. Where at the end of the day, the imitation, the tablets that are being pressed look very similar to regular tablets. Okay. And it is very difficult for the law enforcement at the borders to be able to check every single thing, which is why the True Narc is so valuable and so useful. Yeah, I do think customs has, but my officer would have to confirm that for me. But that can be done as we go through, because I'm almost here to the end. So regional collaboration is more than essential, because in this particular circumstance, no island can manage on its own. We all have limited resources, but the resources are usually much more substantial if we pool them and work together with them. Okay, so preparedness and prevention for this onslaught, which we know is coming. Well, in certain instances, it's here already. Preparedness is our strongest defense. This includes surveillance, public education, and training for the first responders. We in Barbados, we work closely, as I said, with NCSA, the police service, customs, to monitor the trends. And the early warning system allows us to detect and report the emerging threats quickly, because our goal is to stay ahead of the problem and not to react after the fact. Now, some final thoughts for you to close. I just want to make it clear that thankfully, Barbados at this point in time is not in crisis as it relates to this opioid epidemic. But we are in a high level of awareness because we know that vigilance is essential. The Forensic Sciences Center, we have the capacity to detect the opioids, including fentanyl. Early detection, we know, saves lives. Collaboration across agencies, and even more importantly, across the region, is key. And preparedness is what protects all of our people, and it also protects our future. So thank you very much. I hope that I was able to give you some information that you would consider useful. And as we go through this morning, I welcome any questions. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer them. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Corbin. And I want to add to all of the accolades that I read out earlier. I want to add teacher, because you have an innate ability to take something that can be complicated and to distill it into small, understandable packets of information. I thought that was a complete and fairly good presentation on fentanyl. You were able to tell us why this topic is important. Not waiting until there's a crisis, but being prepared. You walked us through how it is derived from the poppy plant, how we have natural opioids, semi-synthetic opioids, and then fully synthetic opioids. You explain how they have medical applications, but then you caution that there's a balance between pain relief and that high potential for addiction. You walked us through the pharmacology of the drug, how Narcan can be used to reverse overdoses. Then you went into the Barbados context, and you indicated there were limited opioid submissions over the years, no confirmed cases of fentanyl. And then I like how you walked us through the steps that the Forensic Science Center would take if you were to receive a submission of an opioid or fentanyl sample. You also touched briefly on regional and global trends, preparedness and prevention, and you left us with some, I think, very important and final thoughts. And you reiterated, first of all, that Barbados is not in a crisis. I think it's important to say that up front. But you also mentioned that preparedness is not only going to protect Barbados, but the region as a whole. Collaboration is key, and early detection saves lives. So I want to thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. I'm sure there'll be many questions at the end. But before I move on to, so thank you, Cheryl. So before I move on to Sergeant Reckley,
You're welcome.
thank you. I just want to reiterate what Maria Hines said in her welcome remarks. So the objectives today are to improve the level of knowledge among participants on illicit fentanyl and other illicit opioids, to discuss the pharmacology and potential dangers of illicit opioids, to strengthen your capacity, the countries that are participating today, and specifically your national early warning systems, if you have them, to respond to illicit opioids, as well as to discuss some case studies on opioid overdoses and deaths. So at the end of the webinar, we're going to have an evaluation that we want you to fill out. You can think about these objectives and you can let us know whether we have fulfilled those objectives. So at this stage, I want to welcome Sergeant Malachi Reckley from the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Sergeant Reckley, you have the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Clark. Good morning, participants, and very special thanks to my predecessor. She did a marvelous job, just as you stated. She kind of made my job really easy. So there will be some repetition with some of the information provided, but just to say, like, uh, as an objective, it is one that needs to be completed. I just want to confirm that my slide is being seen. My slides are being seen.
Yes, Sergeant, you are good to go.
Yes.
So, yeah. So just as it stated, the presentation is the threat of fentanyl in the Bahamas. As Mr. Clark earlier introduced me, I'm a part of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Scientific Support Services, specifically the Toxicology Unit. So the objectives, as identified, to improve knowledge on illicit fentanyl and synthetic opioids, to discuss the pharmacology and dangers of illicit opioids, to share case studies of overdoses and deaths in the Bahamas, to improve awareness of fentanyl and provide recommendations for combating its misuse. So unlike my predecessor, the Bahamas has had a number of cases of fentanyl overdoses, confirmed fentanyl overdoses. Some may attribute it to our proximity to the US, but she identified in her slide some of the reasons in terms of tourism, shipping, so tourism, shipping lanes, geography. But for us, we have predominantly been a nation where marijuana and cocaine were the predominant drugs abused, and that was attributed to geographic factors and trafficking routes. Marijuana, cocaine, stimulants, they are also some of the drugs that we see that have been identified specifically in postmortem samples or by our chemistry unit, predominantly, specifically when it comes to stimulants, amphetamine, methamphetamine, MDA, MDMA, MDEA. Some of the other drugs that we are now seeing, some of the now formulations that we are now seeing drugs appear in, are candies, vape oils, cereals and treats, mushrooms, abuse of prescription drugs and more potent substances like fentanyl. We are now also seeing in the Bahamas. There have been a number of interdiction cases where pill presses have been found at locations with drugs made by these pill presses, and presumptive tests done on them where some of the aforementioned illicit compounds have been found in them. Why we can say that we are now seeing this change in our drug profile in the Bahamas, it can be attributed to the growth in synthetic drug markets globally, the presence of benzodiazepines and stimulants with opioids, persons now using more drugs. So it's like polysubstance abuse. Not only are they using one drug, but they're using other drugs that may have been adulterated or cut with other drugs. So that may be a contributing factor. And then just fentanyl has been increasingly detected in mixed drug samples attributed to its potency. And its potency, as identified by the previous presenter, like, yeah, a little fentanyl goes a long way. What is fentanyl? Once again, just a background on fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It was first synthesized by Paul Janssen. It's a highly potent analgesic. That just means analgesia refers to its ability to reduce pain. It's used for pain management in medical settings. It also has euphoric effect, and that's why it's a drug of abuse. Euphoric means it just gives you a feeling of high, a well-being, of feeling better. So persons who may be experiencing not only physical pain, but those drug users who experiencing psychological pain may find benefit in quotation, from its use. It's 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine and approximately 80 times more potent than heroin, which is an illicit compound. Even in small doses, it can be lethal. The available formulations of fentanyl includes transdermal patches. These are patches that can be stuck on the arm that have sort of a timed release. Injectable solutions, once again, you want slow and controlled release because, as we've stated, just a small amount, as indicated by the photo on to the right of the slide, just a small amount can result in lethality. So the pharmacology of opioids, to repeat again, but you can't really tell the history. You can't really describe fentanyl without describing some of its pharmacology. It binds to mu opioid receptors in the CNS, the brain and spinal cord, in the PNS, the peripheral nervous system, which accounts for sensory neurons, autonomic nerves, and peripheral organs and tissues. Effects include severe respiratory depression, muscle rigidity, seizures, coma, and hypertension. And all of these are attributed to that its binding to its receptor causes such a global effect on certain systems that will be identified on the next slide, that you start to see why you see all of these adverse effects when associated with fentanyl's toxicity. Small dose variations can cause fatal overdoses due to respiratory depression. So one of the means by which this respiratory depression happens is by hypercapnia and hypoxia. So hypercapnia refers to your body's ability when the partial pressure of carbon dioxide rises, your body now needs to ventilate itself. Fentanyl suppresses this urge. Hypoxia refers to when the partial pressure of oxygen is reduced in the body. Once again, your body's supposed to ventilate, you're supposed to breathe. These are processes that happen automatically. You don't control it. Your brain controls this automatically. But fentanyl, it has the effect of reducing the urge or the drive for these processes. So if you look at the right of this slide, you start to see like all of it may not be that clear, but it affects the cerebral cortex, the medulla oblongata, rhythmic centers in the brain. So all of these things are responsible, and its effects can be stimulation or inhibition. And you start to see the pathways by which it affects these things. So chemoreceptors in the brain that responsible for identifying hypercapnia that we've stated on the previous slide, that elevated carbon dioxide, what's supposed to get your body now to experience this drive to breathe, that is being suppressed. And then you have receptors in the aortic bodies that are responsible for identifying when partial pressure of oxygen really drops as a result of slowed or delayed breathing. That's the hypoxia. Now you're now supposed to experience this drive to like breathe more. And if you watch the bottom of this figure, you see how it's connected to actual nerves in the sort of chest cavity that's responsible for expanding and contracting to help with the ventilation process, to help with breathing. And this is why you now see the effects you do. So it's not a single thing. So many receptors throughout a number of systems are actually being stimulated or inhibited by the binding of fentanyl to mu opioid receptors. In the nervous system, it causes CNS depression, hypoxia, as stated earlier, which is reduced oxygen, psychosis, a loss of reality, respiratory system, it causes decreased respiratory rate, apnea, hypoxia, once again, hypercapnia, elevated carbon dioxide. In the cardiovascular system, it causes reduced blood flow and bradycardia. In the gastrointestinal system, what you're now seeing is constipation, nausea, and vomiting. So, as you can see, fentanyl effects are kind of global, and it kind of explains why you now see it. Nervous system responsible for automatically getting you to breathe under certain conditions, hypoxia and hypercapnia. The respiratory system aids in that. The respiratory system is the actual system responsible for ventilation. Fentanyl has an effect on that. The cardiovascular system, which is responsible for oxygenation and getting oxygen around, because now you have less of this breathing going around, less breathing going on. You now have reduced oxygen levels, and constipation, nausea, and vomiting are just are related to its gastrointestinal effects. With respect to its pharmacology specifically, it's mediated by binding to mu, delta, and kappa receptors. All of these receptors are not only bound to by fentanyl, but other opioids to varying degrees. Some agonists are stronger, and an agonist is just a chemical that binds to a receptor, and in its binding, it causes either stimulation, it causes something to happen, or inhibition, it causes something not to happen. So by binding to mu, delta, or kappa receptors, you now have the effects, both the pharmaceutical effects and the toxic effects of fentanyl now being seen. The analgesia, which is that pain relief we see, is as a result of the reduced production of substance P, and that's just a compound that is responsible for helping with the identification of pain. So our body, when it's in a state of pain or distress, it releases this compound called substance P, and our body helps to detect that. That's like a means of identifying. It's a messenger to our body that some pain is being experienced. But what happens is, as fentanyl binds to the mu opioid receptor, it actually causes secondarily the reduction of substance P, and this analgesic effect, this effect of reducing pain, modulating pain, is actually, see, your body is not experiencing the pain anymore. It's just decoupled from the experience itself. So your body still, your pain receptors are still being stimulated. It's just that your body is now decoupled the two processes. So now, as opposed to it registering as pain, this substance P being reduced now results in it now being seen as your body now experiencing a degree of calm or uh, non-identification of pain. The euphoria associated with it is secondary to mu opioid binding, and that is as a result of increased concentration of dopamine, which is known as a chemical, that the feel-good chemical in the body. It actually helps us to feel good, and that addictive nature, that addictive tendency, that tolerance, that addictive nature of fentanyl and other opioids is seen as a result of this increased concentration of dopamine. On the next line, you'll see where it states that dopamine actually causes abuse and tolerance. The last line, which is chemical tolerance, that speaks to chemical cellular tolerance. That speaks to the functional tolerance that can result as a result of fentanyl binding to its receptors. And all that means is your body gets adapted to the presence of this drug such that it now requires more of a drug to actually be present to elicit a previous effect seen. So let's say your body might upregulate the number of receptors. So now if there's more receptors, you need more of the drug to bind to get the feeling that you previously got from the drug, fentanyl. Right here are some of fentanyl's analogs. The analogs of fentanyl include sufentanil, alfentanil, carfentanil, 3-methylfentanyl, fentanyl itself, alpha-methylfentanyl, and low-fentanyl. If you start to look at it, you start to see this 6-ring structure with the nitrogen attached to it. That is predominantly the fentanyl group, and modifications to the left of it where you now start to see differences in the actual analog itself. And chemists actually do this to sort of avoid these drugs being on certain lists or the prohibition of these drugs. So as soon as a drug is prohibited or as soon as a drug becomes illegal, or to attempt to obviate the drug, an illicit drug, what they do is they tweak the drug such that you get some of the same effects, because how drugs bind to receptors are these intermolecular interactions. So once the drug can fit onto the binding site and you have these functional groups associated with the receptor itself and the drug itself, and provided that there can be agreement between them two. There can be binding. The intermolecular forces are attracted to each other. Then you can have binding to a receptor by another drug or by a similar drug. So that's how these analogs actually work. They elicit some of the same effects. As stated, some may be more potent, such as carfentanil, which is extremely potent, or the other drugs which may have varying degrees of potency as a consequence of these additional functional groups. Now, these receptors are such that when you add a functional group on it, it may become so bulky that it doesn't fit into, think of receptor and chemical binding as sort of a lock and key mechanism, right? The receptor has a particular shape. The compound can fit in the shape based on its intermolecular forces, right? Intermolecular forces of attraction. But if you start to add functional groups, it starts to get so big that it may not fit as neatly into the receptor binding site, and therefore you may not have the agonism, the ability to stimulate or inhibit certain effects that result in the effects seen from fentanyl may not be as great as that of fentanyl, or it may be greater in certain instances, such as that of naloxone, which binds greater to mu binding sites than actual fentanyl does. So with respect to our forensic toxicology unit, right now at this time, we have immunochemical techniques that are responsible for the detection and screening of fentanyl. All immunochemical technique is you take the body's natural antibody, antigen binding properties, and you take a small chemical like any drug, but in this instance, it's fentanyl. You add it to, you create an antigen. And what the antigen does is you raise antibodies that when this antigen is seen in a particular sample, it binds and it's detected. So in this instance, we use our Randox evidence investigator semen for urine, we use the VVE analyzer. It's just a different immunochemical technique. We use Randox for blood. We use the VVE for urine. And what we do is we help in the capacity of supporting law enforcement in terms of postmortem cases, human performance cases, and public health, because our information is such that it may clue medical professionals into what exactly is happening, and that can lead to legislation being drafted, or first responders now being advised as to things to look out for. So in the Bahamas so far, we have had 18 confirmed cases of fentanyl-related overdoses. In 14 of the cases, we have had fentanyl analogs and/or the precursor, which is 4-ANPP, which usually indicates illicitly produced fentanyl in the drug market. So yeah, you see fentanyl labeled, you see 4-ANPP in 10 of our 18 cases. You see acetylfentanyl, fluorofentanyl, some of the other fentanyl analogs, FIB fentanyl, despropionyl orthofentanyl, methoxyacetylfentanyl, parafluoroisobutyryl fentanyl, and all these there's just analogs. An analog is just, you have the initial fentanyl compound, you stick an X chemical, you stick an X functional group onto it, and it sort of tweaks such that it's an analog, it's a related compound of fentanyl. So in terms of fentanyl overdoses cases, some of the statistics you'll see, a greater number of males have been affected by this. The age range is 20 to 50 years old, what we've seen. There have been 17% of the cases are females, and about 82, 83% are males. With respect to status, 44% of the cases are tourists, and the remainder are residents. So that's about 56%. This is just a line graph showing exactly the number of cases each year. So in 2017, when the first case was identified, we saw one confirmed fentanyl case. And our confirmations, I neglected to state that though we only screen for fentanyl using the immunochemical technique called Randox, and the kit we use, because it comes with a number of kits. So the kit that we use is very specific such that an advantage and a disadvantage of immunoassay techniques is its cross reactivity. That just means that you have one compound, and if you have related compounds, you can now get those to actually be detected by the same thing. But the kit that we use, which is the drug of abuse whole blood ultra, not only does it identify fentanyl, it specifically identifies fentanyl, tramadol, hydrocodone, oxycodone. So it's kind of specific. So when we get presumptively positive fentanyl in our immunochemical technique, in our Randox technique, it is very likely that when we send that off for it, what we've seen is 100% of the time, we've seen it confirmed. We've seen it confirmed by National Medical Services in Horsham, Pennsylvania. That's who we use for our confirmation via LCMSMS. But in the first year, we got one case. That was 2017 when we first saw an incident of a suspected fentanyl overdose. By 2018, we saw two cases. It kind of fell in 2019 back to one case. In 2020, there were no confirmed cases. In 2021, we saw two confirmed cases. 22, one confirmed case. By 23, there were three confirmed cases. And up to our most recent data, which is for 2024, we saw 7 confirmed cases of fentanyl. Now, what I would say is I am interested to see what Our data from 25 and 26, it's not been completely aggregated just yet. And 26 hasn't been, the year isn't concluded yet. But I am very interested to see like where this line is going to go, because in attending a webinar last week hosted by CFSRE, which is the Center for Forensic Science Research and Education in Pennsylvania, they actually noticed a presenter at CFSRE and another presenter from a forensic lab in Cleveland, Ohio, suggested that they have actually seen declines to levels pre-COVID. So that was interesting. Specifically, the presenter from Cleveland suggested that fentanyl was not the just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. He suggested that the major overdose compound they saw was actually cocaine, which I thought to be very interesting. And because of our proximity to the US, I'd like to see how our data is actually, how it affects our data. So that'll definitely be an interesting thing to see. This is just another breakdown of not only are we identifying fentanyl, but we are also identifying other drugs of abuse in cases where we had suspected fentanyl overdose, right? So we've seen ethanol, which is another depressant. So not only now are you having fentanyl, which depresses the respiratory system, but ethanol at elevated concentrations actually also depresses, is also a depressant. Benzodiazepine. So of the 18 cases we saw, 11 of the cases have ethanol. Of the 18 cases we saw, 9 have benzodiazepines, be it designer benzos or more traditional benzos. 6 of the cases also had THC in addition to fentanyl. Cocaine was identified, stimulants that could, amphetamines, methamphetamines, other opioids. And then 3 of the cases also conclude diphenhydramine, which is a over-the-counter compound, like usually found in cough suppressant found in cough medicines. So I'll just go through a few of our cases, some of our cases in which we saw fentanyl overdose. So our first, so case 1, which we'll look at, it occurred on May 27, 2024. A 44-year-old male was found unresponsive in his hotel room. His girlfriend stated that the night before they both took 2 ecstasy pills with alcohol. However, the deceased also took his regular pills, zolpidem and alprazolam, in addition to steroids. Zolpidem is a drug used to aid with sleep, and alprazolam is a benzo. And if you start to look at the results of what we're seeing, you see fentanyl, you see norfentanyl, you see the illicit 4-ANPP, ethanol was seen, cocaine was seen, cocoethylene was seen. So it's just a number of drugs. So this is uh, this is significant in that you have a plethora of drugs, or a plethora of drugs and their metabolites being identified in this individual. So, I mean, yeah. And although fentanyl occurred only at 3.6 nanograms per milliliter in this instance, the presence of other depressants may have resulted in this person may have resulted in drug effects that resulted in this toxic event, the lethality of this instance. In case number 2, which is a case from August 28, 2022, you have a 27-year-old male was found unresponsive at his residence. The deceased girlfriend stated he was out drinking the night before, and when she woke in the morning, she discovered him with a foam cup around his mouth, which is usually indicative of an overdose event. In this instance, it's fentanyl again, identified, norfentanyl metabolite. You have alprazolam and etizolam, which are benzodiazepines. It's just the THC and its metabolite 11-hydroxy-THC were not confirmed, or were not quantitated. Results on the right, they just are the drugs identified. Case number 3, same thing. You have an American female found unresponsive, and this time it happened on a cruise ship. The boyfriend stated they purchased cocaine in West Palm Beach for him and the deceased. Like, in certain instances, as my predecessor spoke about, like, you don't know. You literally don't know someone tells you that this is what the drug is. But I mean, come on. This produced in a clandestine lab. There might be adulterants present, and fentanyl needs to be only at a very small dose. In this instance, that's pretty significant because it's at 28 nanograms per milliliter. Not only did it, in fact, have cocaine, you see cocaine there, 66 nanograms per milliliter. You also see a metabolite of cocaine, benzoylecgonine, at 1900 nanograms. You see ketamine, which is a dissociative hallucinogen, cocoethylene again. So though ethanol isn't on here, you see the metabolite, which is between cocaine and ethanol. Ecgonine methyl ester is another metabolite of cocaine. So this is another instance where you have polysubstances, a number of substances, a number of drugs being found in in the with fentanyl. Case number 4 and 5, same slide, fentanyl identified again. In the first instance, this one is from 2024. You have a 23-year-old Bahamian male seen consuming 2 unknown pills. He was later brought to the ER unresponsive. Fentanyl was identified, norfentanyl. You have the 4-ANPP once again. He was drinking. It's a club environment, so you expect to see some ethanol. In the 5th case, you have a female caller, 47-year-old, reported discovering a Bahamian male just laying on the side of the road unresponsive. Samples were taken from him. Fentanyl was confirmed for ANPP again. So what you now start to see is it gives the idea from what we're seeing is, because it gives clues, right? What we're now seeing is that the fentanyl that is being taken is illicitly produced by this characteristic compound being identified, the 4-ANPP. Once again, case 6 and 7, both 4-ANPP identified again. You have a 50-year-old Canadian male found unresponsive in his hotel room who didn't check out on time. Fentanyl seen, you see the concentration of fentanyl and norfentanyl. 4-ANPP, you see benzoylecgonine, which is a metabolite of cocaine. So another polydrug instance again. In this one, case number 7 from 2023, a 40-year-old American male was found by his brother unresponsive on the sofa with his head tilted back, and he was only known to take pills for anxiety. We didn't identify any anxiety medication, which is usually like a benzo, and no benzos were detected in this instance. We found THC, we found fentanyl. Fentanyl was confirmed 4-ANPP once again, and acetylfentanyl, which is another indicator of clandestinely produced fentanyl. Case number 8 and number 9, in 2022, a witness stated a 27-year-old Bahamian male was out drinking the night before and was found the next morning with a foam cup around his mouth and nose. Once again, you see this again in terms of like severe respiratory depression. Fentanyl, the fentanyl was quantitated, though norfentanyl was also identified, THC and diphenhydramine, over-the-counter medication. April 2021, a 30-year-old Bahamian male found unresponsive at his residence. Pills were found on the scene. The pills fentanyl at a concentration of 37 nanograms. So when you start to see these double-digit fentanyl, you really know that these are you could compare that to the instance where like it's in the other one, it's single digits. So this one is 37, this one is 8.4. Usually we see single digit nanogram per milliliter fentanyl concentrations. So what our case studies actually show is in most instances, fentanyl isn't the only drug detected. There are other drugs, and these drugs are used in combination. They could be depending on concentration. When you look at it, they can be actual adulterants or cutting agents in other drugs. The illicit tablets and powders often contain unknown mixtures. So when I talk about adulterants and cutting agents. So usually when you think of adulterants, these are things that are found in kind of small concentration, whereas the cutting agents are usually found in bulk concentration. So an example would be like cocaine being cut with fentanyl or cocaine being cut with levamisole, which is an anesthetic agent. And as a result of the initial immunochemical technique that we identified, in every instance, we've identified fentanyl semi-quantitatively, because the Randox instrument is semi-quantitative, though we don't report the quantitative results. We just use it to direct further analysis by our partner in NMS, who does confirmation for us. But in all those instances, confirmation was done. And the initial impetus for us to send it off for confirmation was the analytical technique we have at our disposal now, which is the immunoassay technique. So the urgent need, so in terms of awareness, the confirmed number of fentanyl-related cases in the Bahamas is indicative of an emerging health crisis. As stated early in this, I would like to see what our present data will suggest, since we're now seeing partners of ours suggesting that they are now seeing a decline in numbers, and that can be due to interdiction efforts, more awareness to the public, and people are now a lot more aware of the harmful effect of fentanyl. The presence of fentanyl analogs and the combination of fentanyl with other drugs, the risk of overdose is significantly elevated. Like in some of the slides you saw where you saw ethanol and fentanyl, or fentanyl and benzodiazepines. These effects, the depressant effect of a drug like fentanyl, it may actually be exacerbated by depressant drugs such as benzodiazepines or ethanol. There's more urgent need in our nation for the effects of fentanyl. And now, as a result of like the pivot from only marijuana and cocaine, our younger culture, in addition to like the tourists that frequent our shore, they seem to be more interested in experimenting. So they'll take a drug thinking it's one thing, and lo and behold, it could have had fentanyl as an adulterant. Which would be toxic, which could result in potential toxicity. Efforts should be made to enhance monitoring and enforcement against the illegal drug trade in our country, which, to be honest, we're doing the best we can with in terms of law enforcement interdiction efforts by our unit in the Drug Enforcement Unit of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, in partnership with agents like the DEA, agencies like the DEA. They're going a long way, and we are seeing it. Drugs are now being identified by DEU in combination with the DEA and some of the other law enforcement agencies like Customs. And what is happening is they're being brought to our lab, and presumptive analysis by the chemistry unit is being done. But there's much greater work that needs to be done in terms of like confirmation that we would be able to do in-house if we had enhanced laboratory instrumentation such as the GCMS or LCMS-MS, as some of our partners in the region and both internationally are using. We need to improve our overdose monitoring systems. And I guess for us, we need to get to the point in country where drugs doesn't seem like the use of drugs isn't like a moral failing. Yes, it is. Yes, addiction is a problem and it can result in overdoses. But I feel like if the message gets out there that it's not you're not castigating someone, but instead you are willing to help. Other nations have experienced where you have like a needle return policy, or you bringing the drugs into agencies who testing the drugs to ensure that they are not contaminated with other more harmful substances such as fentanyl. And it goes a long way with sort of educating the drug culture, the persons who not only educating persons who are involved in illicit use of drugs. We need to For us, we need to strengthen collaboration with other Caribbean nations, because we do have partners in the region who are capable of identifying it, and we are further along than, say, a nation like Barbados in terms of seeing the presence of fentanyl. And by assisting and exchanging information, we can be our brother's keeper in the region, and we can help to stymie a potential outbreak in the region by suggesting, hey, this is some of the things we're seeing, just a heads up. And that's what the early warning system sort of uh, encourages us to do, and the objective of it. We need to stress the importance of ongoing education and awareness programs to prevent future cases of drug use and drug abuse and overdose. And that concludes my slide. I'm very open to any questions that you guys may have, and thanks for the opportunity to present to you.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Rackley, for that. Again, very comprehensive presentation. I think, as you said during your presentation, having more information, more of the same for this topic, I think is important. I think is important. So I think you sort of you enhanced. There wasn't any repetition. I thought you enhanced what Ms. Corbin presented earlier. So you were able to give us some background on the changing drug profile in the Bahamas and how you are seeing now the introduction of stimulants, candies, vape oils, cereals and other treats, mushrooms, the abuse of prescription medication, and the growth in the synthetic drug market. You also took us through the pharmacology of fentanyl. I think you gave us a little bit more detail in terms of how it affects the body globally and the processes that it affects the processes that it suppresses that leads to reduced respiration and eventually death. And then you also were able to share with us those 18 confirmed cases in the Bahamas, which I think is very, very important to hear about and to know about. And I thought that the case studies were critical in understanding what led to the deaths of these individuals, the circumstances, and the substances that the victims were using. And you raise a number of very important issues, I think. Polydrug use. In all of the cases that you showed us, persons were using a multitude of substances, some more than others, which I think reiterates the point that both you and Ms. Corbin made. Most persons are not out looking for fentanyl. Like none of these folks, I'm sure, were out looking for fentanyl per se. They were maybe looking for ecstasy, looking for some other stimulant, whatever, and they were unaware of the presence of fentanyl in the substances that they were taking. And then on top of that, you mentioned what I would call the additive effect of mixing different drugs, taking different drugs together. So the effects of the drug become greater when you have other substances that work in the same way. This leads to the overdoses and the deaths. And then, people are taking things that, as I mentioned before, they're unaware of what they are taking. You mentioned the need for awareness. You indicated that you see what is happening in the Bahamas as the beginnings of a health crisis, and I'm sure that this is something that the authorities in the Bahamas are aware of and working towards dealing with. And you mentioned the urgent need for public awareness. I think we have to be, and this is where we need the input of other colleagues who are in the prevention space, who are also in the treatment space, for example, where I think the messaging for persons who intend to use drugs, as you said, we need to change our paradigm. We need to not think of drug use by some people as a moral failing, but if we change our attitude towards users and abusers, take a more harm reduction, take some lessons learned in the harm reduction arena, and apply it to this, that maybe we could have some positive outcomes. And you also mentioned the importance of collaboration. So this was an eye-opening. I've seen most of this presentation before. There were some new slides that were thrown in there, but I think this is an eye-opening presentation for me, and I'm sure many of the other participants on this webinar. You also mentioned, I thought interestingly, in a recent event that you attended, that there are indications, at least the state that was giving the webinar, that the cases of fentanyl are declining, are lower, and that's not the main driver for overdoses. And I think this is reflected in statistics we've seen coming out of the US in the last year or two. There is definitely a decline in overdoses and overdose deaths related to fentanyl. So I think that's a positive development. So we will see how those statistics evolve. And also looking forward to seeing your 2025 statistics in the Bahamas. Right now you're on an upward trajectory. So I'm hoping that that mitigates in 2025. So we're looking forward to seeing those statistics. All right. So my colleague Paula, I think, is going to help me with the questions. So I'm going to let's see. There was one question which I think Cheryl responded to in writing, where one of the first responders from Jamaica mentioned that the EMS in Jamaica, he said they were trained to, well, I don't know if it's he or she, Assistant Superintendent Dixon, that they're trained to recognize and treat opioids, and was asking whether medics in the Caribbean in general are not trained. I haven't seen your response, Cheryl. Maybe you can if you can take the mic and indicate what your response was so that everyone can benefit.
Yeah, thanks, Pernell. What I was saying was that first of all, let me apologize if it seems within my presentation that I inferred that the medics in the Caribbean were not trained. If I had done that, I would be presumptuous to think that that is the situation. And I apologize if that was what came through in maybe any part of my presentation. But what I would say for our EMS services here, I have not spoken directly to the health authorities, but I know that our EMS personnel, they're constantly being trained, their protocols are in place, and in many instances, depending on what they're being called out for, many times doctors actually accompany them. I do not think I could stand corrected. I do not think that our paramedics or EMS persons here are allowed to operate like at the level of a medical doctor. So, I mean, that would information would have to come from, maybe whoever is on the feed that can confirm or deny what I'm saying. But one thing I know for sure, there is constant training going on, and they are always trying to make sure that they reach what will be referred to as the best practice or the gold standard within the limitations and resources that they have. Okay. And what we do, as I put in my answer, that whatever information we have as it relates to the protections and so on, when you go to these scenes, we do our best to pass that information to the first responders. In Barbados, our primary first responder, if I could use that term, really and truly is our fire service. And we liaise with them. And one of the things that we're going to be doing when we reopen is there going to be a lot of engagement and training sessions with the fire service, police service, EMS, so that the training can be an ongoing process that is in line with the trends and the challenges that we are seeing. So we're not going to be doing training based on something that we know 5 years ago. That is our intention, and I certainly hope that we would be able to effect that, as soon as possible.
So I want to ask a question that it's not completely fair, but I want to get your professional opinion, Cheryl and Sergeant Reckley, on this. So you mentioned, Cheryl, that you haven't found you haven't had any cases that have come to your attention, to your laboratory's attention, of fentanyl. But you did mention there were a couple other countries where I know, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, there've been at least one case. And I think you mentioned some of the overseas territories as well. Do you think, and Sergeant Redley, you can jump in here as well. Do you think that it is possible that there are cases out there that are undetected because of a lack of forensic or toxicological capacity in some of those other countries? Or just that there is a lack of detection on the part of, I don't know, the medical fraternity, etc. I know, again, this is not a fair question, but do you think it is possible that there is a lack of detection and because of those reasons?
Well, okay, I'll go first. What I can say without a doubt is that because and I always feel very saddened by the fact that we, over the past few years, we have not been able to provide the service and the support as it relates to postmortem toxicology to our country. That we are hoping it's one of our priorities in going back in. This is why the Prime Minister was very adamant that when I informed her of the other pieces of equipment that we needed to have, which are really very expensive within, the monies the Caribbean has. She made it very clear that she was not going to wait till the next financial year. We had to get them now. So she made the monies available to us. So that's why the LCMS is going to come in and a few other pieces for other areas. Okay. It is our firm intention to make sure that we have postmortem toxicology. Anytime that a postmortem is done as a coroner's case, irrespective of whether someone, because once a doctor does not sign off on a death certificate, we have certain procedures in place. We need to do a full tox screen or investigation on that case. We can't just assume, okay, well, he in Caribbean or Bajan parlance, he was a drunkard, so chances are that the alcohol he did drinking a few nights before. We can't just work on it like that and not just only look for alcohol. We have to get, sorry for the noise, it's the proverbial ice cream van that comes around at a time when nobody is going to be buying ice cream, and it keeps a lot of noise. Anyway, right, they'll go. Anyhow. So that brought amusement to everybody's day. Right. So what I'm saying is that to answer your question, in Barbados, yes, I think not I'm saying that there was fentanyl deaths. And you can't say that because we don't have the data. We're not able to provide the service. And that in itself is something that we will be trying very hard to rectify shortly. I cannot speak to other countries. I will not be presumptuous that way. But forensic services is a very expensive thing to do. It's a very expensive service to continue to support. And many law enforcement, because of limitation of monies in their budgets, they have to determine which cases they're sending overseas to have worked on. Right? Also, even if you do have forensic capacity, sometimes your workload is so massive that the backlog is tremendous, and you really can't get all of the cases done any way you would want to. You then have to be selective as to which cases are going to be brought to the front of the line. And many times it is unfortunate, but it's based on whether that case involves another country, like a visitor, right? Or if it is a high profile, meaning person who's well known, status of death, so on and so forth. And those factors are not things that we within the forensic institutions can control. And we don't even want to wish to control them because we are the independent, integral arm of the judicial system. We are not partisan one way or the other. All we're asking, give us the money and give us resources, we do the work. Okay? And what I will say at this point, before my colleague from Bahamas steps in, I really and truly would like to foster relations with the other labs in the region. And going as region, I extend up to Bahamas, Bermuda, and so on. And so even if through OID, you can share the email information and contacts and let us at least start talking because the data that Superintendent Reckley provided, it was eye-opening, really. I think it would serve us all well to share our information as soon as we can. So I hope that's answered your question, Pernell.
What more than answer my question. Thank you very much,
You're
Cheryl.
welcome.
Sergeant Reckley?
So Ms. Corbin did a wonderful job, and it's interesting when you start to see like some of the concerns that traverse the entire Caribbean. Yes, budgetary constraints are a limiting factor in terms of all labs' abilities, and with us being under the umbrella of the police force, that has challenges in itself. And we all are aware that science is an expensive ordeal, and forensic science in particular is very expensive. When Mrs. Corbin spoke about the cost of an LCMS-MS, like that's she's speaking about an item that is now the bread and butter of forensic toxicology. Like that is the gold standard, but you confined to a budget. You are confined by a budget. So now it's like, which do you do? Do you get an LCMS that is a six-figure tag and that has tens of thousands of dollars in maintenance costs annually, or a patrol vehicle? Like, so these are the decisions that have to be made. But I guess to get back to your question, uh, for us, once again, I won't step outside of my lane, for lack of a better phrase, to speak about other nations. But I know that uh, with us, this may not be truly reflective of everything that has transpired because it is dictated. There are certain considerations that are born when you select which samples need to be sent off for further testing or which samples a post-mortem is actually done on. So there are priority matters. So though this is the case where you have this historical information, or this is a tourist. So the American embassy might actually be pushing for a suspicious death in the Bahamas. Like, hey, what happened to our citizen? So, like, there are a number of layered things happening. So we respond as best as we could. And for us, I actually think that chemistry would be the better indicator. So what happened with this whole overdose cases, we actually identified it first in toxicology, right? So you saw post-mortem instances of fentanyl, which means that this is already in the drug supply. Not only is it in the drug supply, it's now in a person, and this has contributed to someone's death. There are persons who are taking this drug who are still alive. So we haven't addressed the large swath of, hey, where is this drug? Is it in our drug supply? How prevalent is it in our drug supply? So chemistry is usually, from what I've seen from some of the webinars I've been to, like chemistry is usually the vanguard in terms of detection. Chemistry detects, and then Toxi now, after hearing, okay, this is what is in our drug supply, now we could be like, oh, this explains why we are now seeing it in decedents. But yeah, I cannot say conclusively that it reflects everything or it reflects all the instances of overdose death. But in instances where we do detect it from uh, the Randox instrument, and I feel very confident in the results provided by that instrument, and especially by that assay specifically, because as I stated, it kind of teased out. So there are a number of drugs that can cross-react with certain things, but in this instances, it separates generic opioids, tramadol, oxycodone, all these things fit under the umbrella of opioids and opiates, but it specifically identifies fentanyl. So I know when, and I know, and the team knows when we identify fentanyl, we are we are almost certain that it will be confirmed. So yeah, I hope that answers what
Yes,
was
yes,
asked.
you both answered my question very, very clearly. Because I think a lot of what applies to you will apply to other countries as well. So now that I have you on the line here, Sergeant Rex, I have two questions for you. One from Gregory Wright. Has there been any noticeable reduction in the use of cocaine and marijuana? These are the traditional substances in the Bahamas with the advent of fentanyl. That's question number one. And question number two, uh, can you speak to seizures? This is from Gina Archer. Can you speak to us on seizures in the Bahamas? What are you seeing in the drugs that you've seized, and have you been able to show that there's fentanyl in any of the drugs that you have seized?
So to answer the first question in relation to uh, whether or not we're actually seeing, the first one was whether we're seeing the drugs in, repeat them again for me, please.
Sure. If there's a noticeable reduction in the use of cocaine and marijuana with the advent of fentanyl.
Okay, so for that question, we are still seeing the same number of of cocaine and marijuana cases. And how I know that is, I conferred with my colleagues in the chemistry unit, and they gave me like a breakdown of the cases that they are seeing, and they have not seen anywhere they have not seen like a drastic reduction in those cases. So, I mean, there isn't a statistically significant dip in those cases. We're still identifying in postmortem sample. It's like you more likely than not, the drug that will be identified in most instances, second to ethanol, would be THC or its metabolite. So we haven't seen, so from a toxicology perspective, we haven't seen a reduction in that. In terms of interdiction efforts, I know consistently our chemistry unit works with the DEU, which is another branch of the Bahamas Police Force, where they do sampling. And in their sampling cases, they're seeing like uh, large amounts of cocaine or marijuana, large seizures of cocaine and marijuana actually being seized also. So we haven't seen, I can't say that we've seen it to be we've seen statistically significant reductions in the abuse of the more common drugs. Because yeah, our path, our geography in terms of how these drugs actually traverse from smaller markets to get to the larger market which is the US, where these things actually they're desired. Like we haven't seen any reduction in uh noticeable reduction in cocaine and marijuana. With respect to seizures, we consistently see efforts of with collaborations between DEU, the Drug Enforcement Unit of the Bahamas Police Force, and the DEA. We see in terms of seizures happening on a large scale. A few weeks ago, not a few weeks ago, but in February, I was on a course in the US right in Florida, and we were actually present when the DEA did a sampling event where they got a large supply of cocaine and Tuscasset from the Caribbean region, just not the Caribbean region, but specifically outside of the Bahamas. This interdiction happened. So yeah, in sort of waters just outside of the Bahamas. So we are still seeing seizures both locally and in collaboration with our partners in the US. But seizures haven't gone down. But somehow we're still trickling in. These drugs are still trickling in. There have been seizures in terms of pill presses. My colleagues in chemistry, once again, they've seized pill presses. We've now identified some of these gummy compounds have been found in schools. So this thing is drug in terms of drug efforts, interdiction efforts, like drugs are getting out there and kids are now being exposed to it. Because you can't tell me if you formulate a drug in a bright color, like that's going to be highly attractive to and alluring to kids. So yeah, we are definitely seizing drugs. But in terms of its impact on the larger amount of drugs that's actually traversing our nation, our borders, yeah, we're definitely doing our part. But I'm sure it isn't completely everything that's out there.
Thank you very much for that. So just a couple other comments from the participants. Um, we have Mr. Powell who indicated that she's also very concerned about the likelihood of illicit fentanyl and other opioids, but they just are not able to detect. They just don't have the data. Um, I saw Sabrina Rutharam from Suriname asking whether fentanyl is used in cancer management by patients in Barbados and the Bahamas. I'm pretty sure throughout the region that fentanyl is used medically. I think that's the case across the region. Um, but I also have a question for you, Sergeant Reckley. Um, you mentioned that 14 of the 18 confirmed cases, because of the metabolites you discovered, were most likely illicit fentanyl. The other four were diverted medical fentanyl, or you're just not sure? Because my basic question is, do you think there's some diversion from medical fentanyl to illicit use?
To that, I can't speak conclusively, and why that is when you think of these analytical techniques, they have a detection, like there's an actual limit below which they can't detect. So to be honest, just because you don't see a drug stated on the analytical request does, or just because you don't see a metabolite stated, doesn't mean that the metabolite isn't present.
Yeah.
The analytical technique may not have been able to identify it because of the concentration at which it's found. So for me to hazard a guess as to whether this is whether this is a substance that's been sort of taken from legitimate means and used for illicit purposes, I can't speak to that with complete confidence. I won't do that. But yeah, the absence of a particular compound, or the absence of a compound on a toxicology report, a postmortem report, is not stating that it isn't there at all. It's just stating, hey, this is the detection limit. Below this, we can't identify it. So it may be present as well as it may not be present.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I have one question that I think I missed from Susan Davis. Well, let's see. We have a response in the chat from Miriam Hines. In Barbados, its medical use is mainly as an anesthesia and for pain management. Even when used as anesthesia after surgery, fentanyl is sometimes used when available to infiltrate areas around the cut or the wound to manage pain. Okay, thank you very much for that information, Miriam. And then we had a question from Susan Davis. Susan, I think we're going to need you to clarify that question if you care to do that in the chat, or you want to take the floor. But you said, having listened to both excellent presentations, is it safe to say that the reduction in the cases is as a result of education? And I'm not sure what you mean when you say the reduction in the cases. So if you can clarify that, then maybe Cheryl or Malachi can respond to your question. But in the meantime, we're 4 minutes away from the end. And I'm going to hand over very briefly. Okay, we have another question from Audrey Francis to Sergeant Reckley. Did you say you are seeing Tuscased seizures in the Bahamas? What volume and how recent?
A few weeks ago, a few weeks ago, so two instances. A few weeks ago, my colleagues, once again, they got some Tuscasad in. It was a number of bottles. I can't speak to the exact amount, but it was a number of bottles. And another instance, so that's one seizure locally. And then I was talking about the week that I spent at the DEA labs, where while there, they were doing a sampling of some cocaine, some kilos of cocaine that came in. I think it was like on the order a couple hundreds of kilos and a couple well boxes. I talking about boxes of Tuscasad that were seized by the DEA. So there are seizures of Tuscasad happening, both locally and internationally. I can say that conclusively because I've seen it.
And I can, I can reiterate that as well. I know I've spoken to your colleague in the DEU, who also mentioned that there were some at least another seizure that they made of a shipment of cough syrup that was actually manufactured in Barbados, was going via Jamaica, I believe, and it was on its way to North America. I think the bottom line there is that to get these substances here in the USA, which were once, years ago, were over the counter, you know, you can't buy them over the counter anymore. But in many Caribbean countries, you can buy, over the counter, and in some cases, apparently you can buy as much as you want, because if they're seasoned boxes, that shows that we need proper regulation of these substances in our part of the region. Um, this was a fantastic webinar. I wanna thank, if you don't mind me calling you by your first name, Cheryl and Malachi, for two. Like, I feel as though I am a new expert on fentanyl and opioids, even though I'm not. But the information that you shared, I thought was very complete. It went from first principles. I wasn't scratching my head, and I'm leaving with a much better understanding of how these substances work, how they affect the body, why they're dangerous, and why we need um, to deal with them in an urgent way. Now, I think, Cheryl, you reinforced the point that your organization, the Forensic Sciences Center, is a part of the early warning system, and you reinforce the importance of early warning systems in response to these emerging substances. And I'm happy that you were making that connection. We've been working with our member states, as Maria said in her opening remarks, to build these early warning systems. I was in the Bahamas very recently. I didn't get to see you, Sergeant Reckley, but we had a session. I think you were away at the time. I think you were away on training. But we were able to meet with a number of folks and sensitize a number of individuals there in an effort to develop an early warning system in the Bahamas. And clearly, you would benefit from an early warning system like yesterday, given the situation there. So I hope that we can get that up and running as soon as possible. Um, the responses that I'm seeing on the chat, I completely agree. The presentations were excellent. The way you explained the information and shared the information was clear. And I think that we were informed on this substance and what we need to do to enhance your ability to respond to it. So I want to thank you, Cheryl and Malachi, for agreeing to participate in this. Again, this was fantastic. You're both good teachers, excellent teachers, and clearly you have a passion for what you're doing. And hopefully we can do more of this type of thing in the future. With that, I will turn the floor over to Maria Hines to take us home. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Pernell. Yes, it was a very interesting seminar, and the I think the key takeaway that I have from that is that preparedness is essential. it is good that we are doing webinars like this before we have a crisis, but there's still a lot that we need to be thinking about. And today's webinar, I highlighted a few important takeaways. A lot of them have been mentioned, but I think they're worth repeating. That while the situation varies across countries, fentanyl is present in the Caribbean. In at least some contexts, it's contributing to overdoses and deaths. But there's a lot that is unconfirmed. Nevertheless, the risk is real. We know that from the countries that are already experiencing overdoses. Fentanyl, and I think it was very clear from the very technical presentations, fentanyl is uniquely dangerous due to its extreme potency. For those of us who live in countries that have had a fentanyl crisis for a long time, we're very conscious of that. But I think in countries where fentanyl is new, this is always worth reiterating. It's unique in its potency. The fentanyl derivatives also are becoming stronger and stronger. So the risk is compounded by both the potency and the likelihood that it's mixed with other substances. And this is another thing that I think is always worth remembering, is that the trend we are seeing across the Americas with respect to synthetic drugs overall is that these tend to be blended substances. They rarely appear alone. And the blends are a major part of the toxicity. We heard that about the overdoses that were combined with benzodiazepines and other drugs. And so while we should be looking for fentanyl, that's very important, we should understand that its risk isn't just on its own, although that's important, but the likelihood that it's going to appear mixed with something else is very high. And that has implications not just for the health of the consumers, the fact that the consumers are unaware, but also in the detection side. We have to know what we should be looking for. Pernell and I have had a few conversations already about substances in the region that are sold under brands and brand names, but that the particular mixture varies country to country, and that means that the particular risk to users, it varies country to country. And so these are things that I think are kind of bubbling up in the Caribbean as well. And so addressing this challenge is going to require strong systems. That means forensic systems, toxicology capacity, the early warning systems, which we have been supporting for a long time, well-trained first responders, and all of that taking place in a scenario of capacity constraints that can affect detection and our ability to respond. So there's a real scale of problem. It might not be visible, but it can certainly be there. So I think, for the policy takeaways, we want to think about the importance of strengthening our national laboratories and toxicology capacity. That was mentioned just now in the question and answer session. There's a lot of opportunity for enhanced cooperation and information sharing. I think it was Cheryl who just said, she would love to see us, even in a very informal way, try and link together the different laboratories, and those are things that we can talk about doing. So I'm trying to organize my thoughts here as I'm speaking, but the early detection, the coordination, the preparedness, these are all things that we need to do in order to save lives and to enhance our ability in law enforcement to intervene in a way that protects human security. So those are my closing thoughts on the webinar. And so once again, I would like to thank all of our participants, thank our donors for their support, and of course, as always, the excellent OID team for organizing this event. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Mary. Before everyone jumps off, Paula is going to project the QR code that we want you to use to do the evaluation. So please just point your phones, take a photo, and click on the link that comes up. That will take you to the evaluation for this webinar. We want to hear from you. Your feedback for us is very, very important. Good news from Sabrina in Suriname. Because of this webinar, the Narcotics Unit Suriname will now start discussions on the availability of Narcan for preparedness. Thank you again. So if we did one good thing today, we have the folks in Suriname looking to acquire some Narcan. I think it's important. Cheryl made that point very, very clearly. Cheryl, this is the second time you've made this offer to link the laboratories. As Maria said, this is something we've been talking about for a long time, and I think we need to do it. I think the information that Sergeant Reckley has, all of you should have. Like they have now a set of experiences dealing with fentanyl that many other laboratories don't have. So it would be, I think, imperative for us to link you guys and make sure that you're able to communicate freely and regularly so that everyone is on the same page. Once again, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the day. This was excellent. Please fill out the evaluation before you go so that we can make the future events like this better and bigger and more useful for you. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Malachi. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Cheryl. And to all participants, thank you all very much.
Bueno, pues,